I'm going to be doing today what's called hierarchical supervision in a group, in that I'm going to only work with, and then I will potentially ask the group for either some comments and or if there's a time that makes sense to give suggestions to, I might do that. But I'm going to hold the process really tightly today since we're being recorded and not everybody knows each other and we haven't done group contracting. However, if you choose to go forward in group supervision, we may do a more full process where after we've done some contracting, establish group boundaries, etc., and how we like to work together, then I'll get people more involved in the process. So this is not the only way that group supervision might look, is I guess what I'm trying to point out here. So is there anything that you need from me today before we get started?
Yeah, I was just curious also about confidentiality. I mean, obviously I'm not going to say anything specific, but it's quite general, yeah?
Yeah. So suggestions for you are if there's client names or organization names, what have you, is, speak really generally about the role, anything that brings that client to life, and anything that you need around that. And probably what you will hear from me is a bit of permissioning, like what you would hear in a coaching conversation, because we are in a group.
Right.
Will that work for you?
Yeah, I think yeah.
So my suggestion is that if it doesn't feel comfortable and or you don't want to go down that track or what have you, please feel free to let me know. So you mentioned about when the client comes to a session and they don't know what to talk about. Do you have a particular client in mind?
It's happened now and again, and I always sort of wonder how best to handle it. So it could be, for instance, a client who's, the kind of longer term agreement is to deal with something within their personal life or work, and they say that's my focus, and then they decide I want to do the other one part way through. So there might be a sort of shift in the bigger agreements, so you're kind of renegotiating that, and then there might be a time when they say, I'm not sure what I want to discuss today. So it might feel like part of a shift away from the overarching and then into another area, and then within that area. So it's partly, I know, it's about renegotiation agreements, because I'm somebody, I do send out prep forms. I do encourage my clients to prepare for the coaching session in advance to have a wider agreement, and also for each session to prepare in advance to report back, how things went in terms of what the field work was. So to help them, to work with them to follow through when they're not being coached. So I have a structure. So it's when the client, sometimes a client might be in a position where things are changing, in the process of change, and it's you're also coaching them through a different stage of that, maybe. So there's a few aspects to it. I'm conscious I want to honour the client and how they want to use the time, and I'm conscious that also we need to have a clear focus for the session as well, and I want to honour where they are in terms of if they're not sure as well, because in life sometimes we kind of have some certainty, sometimes things are less clear. Best to support them where they are, really. So it kind of brought up a lot of questions for me about how to be most effective as a coach in a situation that perhaps the client expected to know what to talk about, but suddenly it didn't seem relevant, and they kind of want some guidance, but I don't want to sort of push them along, I want them to find their own direction, so how to empower them as well. And I felt that myself as well as a coachee, at times I thought we started on a path, and then I thought, actually I can't see where to go next with this.
Yeah.
So And how do you deal with that? Because there's something about that as well, isn't there, about that? Sometimes things are clear and you can make them happen, and sometimes you don't feel in that place. You feel that things have to evolve in some way. How do you kind of ride that when you're being coached as well, and still keep your sense of purpose and direction and motivation? So it kind of, yeah.
So it's a really interesting, lots of really thought-provoking questions that you brought today. And, the thing that really stands out for me about what you're talking about here is, how do you manage the partnership between you and the client? And what are some of the key elements of making that successful? So you mentioned before about the need for structure, and I'm wondering about how, that structure is important for you and how that structure is important for the client.
That's really interesting, yeah. It's important for me as a coach because I need to know how they want me to work with them. I need to know what their expectations are for that session. So it might be that their expectations for that session are different from the other sessions, or what they want from me is different. And perhaps it's also about them developing an awareness of what they want, that they want something different on this occasion, maybe. So
yeah, well, and it's really interesting about what you're talking about right now is that who needs to know.
Yeah.
Is that, where I started off on this was asking you, who's the structure for? Is it for you? Is it for the client? Whose benefit, and for whose benefit is that structure? And I guess my question is, in all of that, how much is that structure, is that need for the certainty for you versus how much is that certainty and structure for the client?
Very interesting. Because I could see how that could be a need for a coach to have certainty, where are we going today? But I think sometimes as a coach we have to be prepared to step into the unknown, perhaps, and the client's is in a place of uncertainty, and maybe, as a coach you're walking alongside them. So how do you step alongside them, but at the same time be a coach, keep that role, your role as a coach in that place of uncertainty, and what is the role of the client?
Yeah, really great questions. So what comes up for you about what do you think your role as coach is?
I think it's to hold up a mirror to the client. It's to ask them the question. It's to aid their discovery, to support their discovery, by asking them the questions, by perhaps using your tools that noticing how you are in that place, being aware of yourself and what role you're playing. And I think it's using what tools you have and being prepared to not have a structure necessarily, but to be prepared to bring them in intuitively when you feel the time is right, so that you can't follow a kind of list, a formula. And that's part of the interest of coaching, in a way, is that you really don't know where you're going to be with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you feel confident and or prepared to go into that unknown when the role is for you to have some sort of a plan, it sounds like?
Yeah, I think it's necessary to be able to do that. I think to serve clients well, I think it's part of the tapestry, if you like, that you can offer them a prep form, you can offer them that structure, and if they're not in a place to use that, and they say it just didn't work for me this week, then also to kind of consider what do you do then, and to be open to asking yourself the questions and looking at what you could draw upon within yourself.
Yeah, great. And really giving yourself the permission to go there and
Yeah.
not have those answers. Kind of
Yes.
go
And
into the exploration with the client.
yes. And not have, the client say, this is what I want to get out of this session today, not have that, necessarily that destination that they've kind of, penciled in, if you like, because we never know where we'll go to anyway, but that not having that even, you just sort of standing in a space there at a crossroads thinking, where are we going then?
Mm. And I
They,
think that, I'm going to go a bit broader here, if that's all right with you, is that, you know, when we went around today and looked at the different areas we could have concentrated on for the supervision session, one of the threads that I noticed in other cases we could have unpicked was about, being part of that conversation and really engaging the client and what is, kind of my piece in that. So if that's, if we take that assumption that that's in the field, how does that also impact either, positively or negatively for you, knowing that other people are in that same sort of field?
yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Hmm.
It's
So it's kind
it's
of
a
one
good
of the issues coaches face, yeah?
to be asking the questions. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And also, putting yourself into the context as well. I think that oftentimes as coaches, we're trained that we bring the process and the client brings the content, and we do this thing in the middle, and then the client walks away empowered. And is that really all of it? Because who's actually doing the process?
The client does the process, don't they?
Yeah, and do you?
And we're all doing the process, aren't we? At some level, we're all engaged. Yeah, as coaches, we're in that in a process, aren't we? Of questioning,
Mm,
of awareness, of inquiry, of uncertainty, of discovery.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And so one of the things that you might want to look at is, do you do any sort of reflective journaling at this stage?
I have done. I have done.
Yeah.
When I did my credential, when I did my ACC, I did quite a lot of reflection.
Mm, mm.
You know, listening back to calls and reflecting afterwards, and yeah.
And what were you listening for?
Keywords that people use, where the energy is, what repeated words, where the energy is, all sorts of things, levels of consistency, or if somebody says one thing but they actually mean something else, distinctions, beliefs.
Mm, mm. So those are all really, really great coaching styles of listening. And one of the things that you might want to start integrating into your practice, in addition to that, because that's really important for, understanding how you like to coach, what works for you, what kinds of skills you need to develop for yourself, yeah? And what
Yeah,
I'd like
they're
you
core
to add on.
competencies as well. Sorry, core
Yeah,
competencies
yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, yeah, great. And really important. I don't want to undervalue that. And I'm wondering if you could also start looking at, so what's the impact of me doing that with the client? And or, what happens to me when the client comes and they don't know what they want to do or they're stuck? And that is then something that's really useful to bring to supervision. And or you might start noticing patterns around, well, actually I feel really helpless, maybe, for when a client comes and they haven't done their pre-work.
Right.
And what do we do with it then? So that's a real great sort of way to get into putting yourself into that system, which many of us as coaches forget to do.
Yeah, those would be very useful actually.